My name is Amina Atik, and today we'll discuss how age differs in the ability for second language acquisition. A succinct yet thorough list of characteristics of adult second language acquisition can be found in an article written by Blay and Roman. Some of the characteristics, along with the brief explanation, include lack of success. Young learners can acquire a new language without much effort, whereas older learners require a lot of time, effort, and problem-solving capabilities. This links second language acquisition for an adult closer to learning any other skill, whereas for a child it is a more innate process. General failure. Complete success for an adult in learning a second language is extremely rare and possibly non-existent. There's a variation in success, course, and strategy. Adults fail to different degrees, and there's a lot of inner learner variation. Individual differences play a much greater role in adult second language acquisition than in child acquisition. A variation in goals. Adult learners have various reasons for learning the language and tend to only really learn the aspects that they care about the most. Correlation of age and proficiency. Young immigrants learn the language well, older ones do not. Fossilization. Adults often stop short of success, while children rarely do. Interdetermined intuitions. Non-native speakers do not have the same intuitions as native speakers. Importance of instructions. Children do not need formal instruction to learn a second language. They seem to be able to acquire it simply through sufficient inputs. Adults, however, do need to be formally taught to some extent. Negative evidence. Correction is helpful for adults but not as helpful for children. Role of affective factors include motivation, personality, attitude, etc. They play a large role in adult learning language but seem to have little effect with children. There is an early explanation for a difference between attainment and ultimate attainment that follow three generalizations, including age, rates, and ultimate performance. According to Kroshen, who provided an early explanation for the discrepancies between rate of attainment and ultimate attainment, is that adults develop morphologically and syntactically more quickly than children do in the early stages. Older youngsters learn more quickly than younger ones, again in early stages of morphological and syntactic development, where time and exposure are held constant. And those who start learning a second language naturally as children tend to be more proficient than those who start as adults. A second reasoning includes critical language hypotheses, where younger children and younger learners will perform better and become more proficient in second language acquisitions when they're exposed to a second language early. They will succeed in the end and learn a second language more effectively. The ideal time to study a second language is during childhood. Therefore, it's a good idea to start second language classes earlier in the school year to introduce them to the subject earlier and at a younger age. In the long run, those who start learning a second language as children might typically acquire a better level of competency than those who start later, and this is a claim by Singleton and Ryan. First and second language learning have important windows where children have a significant advantage over adults or teenagers. This critical time refers to the general phenomena of competence decline with rising exposure age. Penfield and Roberts first proposed this theory in 1959. After a certain age, the brain is no longer able to comprehend language in this way, according to Ellis. During this time, language learning can occur organically and effectively. According to Scoville, this crucial time span is as follows. Briefly put, the crucial period theory holds that language acquisition is most effective in the early years of development. The crucial period theory, to put it simply, holds that learning a new language is more difficult beyond the first dozen years of life, and that learning a language is best learned in the early years of childhood. Later, Lundberg coined the word lateralization to describe a period of time when a person's biological change or development was linked to the localization of language processing abilities in the left hemisphere. This period is referred to as adolescence. In other words, children's brains are more plastic than adults in terms of acquiring a language. Caution further asserted that lateralization of the human brain can be completed by the age of 5. The critical period hypothesis therefore believes that kids will learn languages better than adults. Early in life, humans have a superior capacity for acquiring languages. If the capacity is not exercised during this time, it will disappear or decline with maturation. If the capacity is exercised, however, further language learning abilities will remain intact through life. Another reasoning is the fundamental difference hypothesis. Blaise-Roman in 1989 and others first presented the fundamental difference hypothesis. In essence, it says that children and adults both learn languages in different ways, in actuality fundamentally distinct. Children can learn a language implicitly, but adults cannot. They must be expressly taught. As was previously noted, acquiring a language involves a variety of elements, yet it appears that many of these only have an impact on adult acquisition. This makes learning a second language for an adult much like learning any other skill, whereas children are especially equipped to learn a language. Bialystok in 1997 essentially agrees with this idea and says that adults tend to extend the existing categories for language that they have already created from their first language, which is known as assimilation, whereas children seem to create new categories for new aspects of language, which is known as accommodation. She claims that the main difference between adult and child acquisition are not because of maturation, but because of different stylistic learning choices. In other words, there's a different approach to second language acquisitions for older learners and children. Another explanation is biological factors. There's the loss of brain plasticity with aging that may be a contributing factor to the worsening of these physiologic components. The loss of the brain's adaptability has frequently been attributed to myelination, according to Pulmover and Schumann. Heilenstam and Abrahamson in 2003 had a great description of myelination. They described it as the myelination of cortical neurons is a physical chemical process in the brain in which glial cells wrap the axons of the neurons with myelin, which is a substance contained in the glial cells that's composed of lipids and proteins. Myelin wraps around the axons to provide sustenance to the neurons and improve signal conductivity, enabling rapid information transfer over long distances. Additionally, this complicates connections with adjacent neurons. As the brain becomes less pliable with age, language development suffers, according to Heilenstam and Abrahamson. Myelination starts at the fetal stage and lasts long into adulthood, for at least several decades. Myelination, in accordance with Pulmover and Schumann, results in a decline in the capacity to learn grammar. So, in other words, because of myelination causing the loss of plasticity, with age, it becomes harder for adults to learn and acquire a second language. Fossilization is also another factor. Contrary to first language acquisition, which humans go through spontaneously, second language acquisition becomes more difficult and rarely totally successful after a specific period, known as the key phase or sensitive period. Selinker in 1972 called this phenomenon fossilization. Instead of becoming fluent in the target language, many second language learners create their own internalized rule system known as interlanguage. According to Ellis, who contends that learners reach a threshold age at which their brains become less pliable and some language qualities are hard to grasp, age is one of the internal components of fossilization. Another factor that plays a huge role in second language acquisition is the brain structure. The brain structure during childhood and for adults is completely different. Up to the age of 6, children are assured to acquire a typical language, but after that point, it becomes increasingly difficult until just before puberty, and then it becomes extremely rare. Possible factors include maturational changes in the brain, such as the decrease in metabolic rate and neuronal count in the early school years, and the bottoming out of synaptic density and metabolic rate around puberty. On the other hand, the most current neurocognitive research has shown the system in the brain that controls language. According to Olma in 2007, lexical knowledge in first language is dependent on the declarative memory brain system, which also supports semantic and episodic knowledge and has its roots in the temporal lobes. Grammar in first language instead relies on the frontal basal ganglia circuits based procedural memory system, which supports motor and cognitive functions. Contrarily, data suggests that learners initially rely heavily on declarative memory while later learned second languages both for lexical information and the application of complicated forms. However, as they gain more experience, second language learners exhibit procedural learning of grammatical rules and start to resemble speakers of their native tongue. Importantly, we can make relatively precise predictions about language, including with regard to language attrition, because the behavioral, computational, anatomical, and physiological bases of the two memory systems are reasonably well understood, including the nature of forgetting of knowledge and skills in these systems. According to De Keyser, in contrast to adults who have largely lost the ability to learn a language without considering its structure, De Keyser in 2000 tested the fundamental difference hypotheses by Fromm in 1988, which claims that while children are known to learn a language almost entirely through implicit domain-specific mechanisms, adults must use alternative mechanisms, particularly drawing on their problem-solving abilities to learn a second language. The idea is that only individuals with a high level of verbal analytical ability will be able to speak a second language almost as well as a native speaker, but that this capacity is not a significant indicator of success in learning a second language in childhood. In conclusion, we have seen that age can affect second language acquisition in many ways. And there are many reasons that age can affect second language acquisition. Some of the reasons that we have looked into is the lack of success, general failure, variations in success course and strategy, variation in goals, correlation of age and proficiency, fossilization, indeterminate intuitions, importance of instructions, negative evidence, role of affective factors, and some of the other reasonings that we've looked at is the critical period hypotheses, fundamental difference hypotheses, and biological factors as to why age and how age can affect second language acquisition. Thanks.